April 1945. A muddy checkpoint on the Elbe River, Germany. A German woman grabbed an American soldier's arm. Her fingers dug into his sleeve like claws. Tears streamed down her dirt-covered face. She whispered 5 words that would destroy his entire life. "Don't let them take me." Behind her, a Soviet major was walking closer. His hand rested on his pistol. His eyes burned with cold satisfaction. He had found his prey. The American soldier had exactly 3 seconds to decide: follow orders and hand her over to certain death, or lie to his commanding officers, commit treason, and become a hunted deserter. He was just a mechanic from Boston. He fixed trucks. He followed rules. He had never wanted to be a hero. But in that moment, Private Emmett Crowe made a choice that would brand him a traitor, destroy his military career, and change 2 lives forever. What happened next will leave you speechless. This is not a Hollywood movie. This actually happened. And the ending is something you will never forget. If you love incredible true stories from World War II, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video to support our channel. And watch until the very end, because the final chapter of this story will give you chills. Let me take you back to that muddy checkpoint where everything began. The Elbe River had become a border between hope and horror. In the final weeks of April 1945, Germany was dying. The Reich that Adolf Hitler promised would last 1,000 years was collapsing in flames, rubble and blood. And caught in the middle were millions of ordinary Germans who wanted only one thing: to escape the Soviet army advancing from the east. The American checkpoint near Torgau processed over 3,000 refugees every single day. 3,000 faces, 3,000 stories, 3,000 desperate people begging for safety on the western side of a river that now divided life from death. The landscape surrounding the checkpoint looked like the end of the world. Bomb craters had turned flat farmland into a moonscape. Villages that once held families, churches, and markets were now blackened skeletons of stone. The smell hung over everything: diesel fuel from American trucks, smoke from fires still burning in the distance, and something worse: the sweet, terrible stench of bodies left unburied for days. Private Emmett Crowe stood at his post and watched the human river flow toward him. He was 23 years old, a mechanic from South Boston, who had joined the army because he believed in something. Now, after 2 years of war, after watching friends die in frozen forests during the Battle of the Bulge, he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. He fixed trucks. He fixed jeeps. He tried not to think too much about the larger questions of why he was here and what any of it meant. The refugees came in waves, women with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much. Children clutching their mothers' skirts, too tired to cry. Old men shuffling forward on feet wrapped in cloth because their shoes had worn through weeks ago. They carried bundles of clothing, photographs, whatever small pieces of their old lives they could hold. "Papers ready!" the German-American translator shouted in both languages. "Women and children to the left, men for questioning to the right. Have your papers ready." Emmett had learned to spot the ones who were hiding something. The nervous glances, the hands that shook when presenting documents, the stories that didn't quite add up. Most of the time, it didn't matter. These were civilians fleeing a war they hadn't started and couldn't stop. He waved them through because what else could he do? But then there were the Soviet liaison officers. 3 of them stood near a separate checkpoint, watching the refugee flow with cold attention. They wore Red Army uniforms decorated with medals. Their job was simple: identify any Germans who had served in the Wehrmacht, the German military, and claim them for Soviet custody. Major Arkady Strelnikov was the worst of them. He had the eyes of a hunter selecting prey from a herd. A cigarette hung from his lips as he scanned the crowd, looking for any sign that might reveal a hidden soldier, a former officer, or anyone else the Soviets considered a war criminal. When he found them, he smiled. Not with warmth, with satisfaction. Under the Yalta Agreement signed by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin just 3 months earlier, Allied forces had agreed to hand over certain categories of prisoners to whichever power claimed jurisdiction. For German military personnel on the Eastern Front, that meant Soviet custody. And everyone knew what Soviet custody meant. It meant interrogation. It meant labor camps. It meant, for many, a death sentence carried out slowly over years of frozen Siberian winters. Among the refugees pressing toward the checkpoint that April morning was a woman who understood this better than most. Anneliese Vogler was 28 years old. She had spent the last 4 years as a Wehrmacht nurse, treating wounded German soldiers in field hospitals across Poland and eastern Germany. She had held dying boys younger than her brother. She had performed surgeries during artillery bombardments. She had done everything asked of her by a country that was now asking her to die for its sins. 2 weeks ago, when the Soviet advance made remaining impossible, she had run. She had cut her blonde hair short with kitchen scissors. She had burned her nurse's uniform in a farmhouse stove. She had stolen civilian clothes from an abandoned apartment and traded her mother's wedding ring, the only thing she had left of her family, for forged identity papers. The papers said she was Liesel Hoffmann, a schoolteacher from Dresden, displaced by the Allied firebombing. Not a single word was true except the nickname her mother had given her as a child. Now she stood in line, heart pounding so hard she thought her ribs might crack. 10 people ahead of her, then 9, then 8. She whispered a prayer she had repeated for 14 days, straight. Please God, let me pass. Don't let them see, don't let them know. 7 people. 6. 5. The Soviet major was scanning the crowd again. His eyes moved systematically across faces, searching for recognition, for fear, for the small tells that revealed hidden truths. Anneliese kept her head down. She had learned that survival meant becoming invisible. She had learned that in a world gone mad, drawing attention meant death. 4 people. 3, 2. She reached the front of the line. A young American soldier stood before her. Tired, green-eyed, freckles across a sunburned nose, grease stains on his mechanic's uniform. His name tag read, Crew. She extended her forged papers with trembling hand. He took them, barely glanced at them, started to wave her through. For one beautiful moment, she thought she had made it. Then a voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Russian, harsh, commanding. Ya yeyo znаю. Anneliese's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, already knowing what she would see. Major Arkady Strelnikov was walking toward the checkpoint, his finger pointed directly at her face. His boots crunched against gravel with each step. His eyes held the satisfaction of a predator who had finally caught his prey. Wehrmacht nurse, he announced in heavily accented German. Torgau Field Hospital, I saw you there. You treated German wounded while Soviet prisoners died in the next room. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Around them, other refugees shrank back, grateful that someone else had been chosen. The American soldiers looked confused, waiting for translation. The German-American corporal repeated the major's words in English. Emmett Crow's eyes widened. Wehrmacht meant German military. That meant this woman was supposed to be handed over to Soviet custody under Allied agreements. That meant whatever happened next was out of American hands. Anneliese's forged papers fluttered to the ground. Her legs refused to move. 14 days of running, 14 days of sleeping in ditches and drinking from dirty streams, 14 days of eating whatever scraps she could find, all of it ending here, 50 feet from safety. Major Strelnikov smiled again, that cold, satisfied smile. Then something inside Anneliese broke, not into pieces, into action. Her body moved before her mind could decide. She didn't run away from the checkpoint. She ran toward it, toward the one person whose eyes had shown even a small flicker of humanity. She grabbed Private Emmett Crow's arm with both hands, and her fingers digging into his sleeve like a drowning woman gripping driftwood. She looked up at him, this American stranger whose name she didn't know, and spoke in broken English she had learned from treating Allied prisoners of war. Please, don't let them take me. I helped Americans. I helped your men. I am nurse. Please, they will kill me. Please. Her nails dug into his arm hard enough to leave marks. Emmett froze. Time seemed to stop around him. He felt her hands shaking against his sleeve. He saw the absolute terror in her blue eyes, eyes that had witnessed too much death and were now begging for one more chance at life. Behind her, Major Strelnikov was approaching, his hand moving toward the pistol at his belt. 20 yards away, Emmett Sargent was turning to see what the commotion was about. In that moment, Emmett Crow thought about Desmond Cavanaugh. Des had been his best friend since basic training. They had survived the frozen hell of the Battle of the Bulge together. They had promised each other they would both make it home to Boston, drink cold beers, and forget everything they had seen. Then German artillery had found their position. Shrapnel had ripped Des open like paper. He was 19 years old, bleeding out in the snow, and Emmett had held him, pressing useless hands against wounds that wouldn't close. Des had gripped Emmett's collar with fading strength and whispered his final words. "Take care of them, Em, the ones who can't fight back. Promise me." Emmett had promised. He had carried that promise through months of additional combat, through nightmares that woke him sweating in his bunk, through the moral weight of a war where everyone claimed to be righteous, but everyone committed terrible acts. Now, here was a woman, enemy nationality, Wehrmacht background. Everything his orders demanded he hand over to Soviet justice. But looking at her face, he didn't see an enemy. He saw the same fear he had seen in a French girl hiding from SS patrols in a cellar, the same desperation he had witnessed when American soldiers liberated a Jewish family hidden behind a false wall, the same human terror that existed beyond uniforms, flags, and politics. He saw someone who needed protection from people who would hurt her, and in that moment, Private Emmett Crowe made a choice that would destroy his military career, brand him a deserter, and change his entire life forever. He covered her hands with his own. He looked at the approaching Soviet major with a steady gaze he did not feel inside, and he spoke words that were complete lies. "She's coming with me, sir. I need to question her. She claims to have intelligence on remaining German military positions in the Torgau sector." Major Strelnikov stopped walking. His eyes narrowed with suspicion and anger. "This woman is German military personnel. She belongs in Soviet custody for war crimes investigation. The Yalta Agreement requires you to transfer her immediately." Emmett's mind raced for any response that would work. "And if she has intelligence that could save American lives, Major, I need to extract that information first. Standard protocol for any potential intelligence asset." There was no such protocol. Emmett was a mechanic who fixed trucks. He had no training in interrogation. He had no authority to detain anyone for intelligence purposes. He was making everything up as the words left his mouth. Strelnikov studied him with cold calculation. The major was weighing his options. Push this confrontation and create an international incident with an ally, or let one German nurse escape and find easier targets among the thousands of other refugees. Finally, the major spoke through clenched teeth. "Your superiors will hear of this, Private. You are making a very serious mistake." He turned and walked away, already scanning the crowd for other prey. Emmett's sergeant was approaching now. He had maybe 30 seconds to figure out what he was going to do with a German nurse he had just claimed was an intelligence asset when he had absolutely no idea how to handle such a situation. Anneliese looked up at him, tears streaming down her dirt-covered face. "Thank you," she whispered in German. "Danke, thank you." Emmett looked down at her and realized he had just stepped off a cliff. There was no going back now, no way to undo what he had done, no way to return to the simple life of a mechanic who followed orders and kept his head down. "Don't thank me yet," he said quietly, unsure if she understood his English. "I have no idea what happens next." But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to let them take her. Whatever the cost, he had made his choice. And Emmett Crowe, mechanic from Boston, who had never wanted to be a hero, who just wanted to survive the war and return home to his mother and younger brother, had become something he had never planned to be. A protector of the enemy, a liar to his own command, and possibly, though he didn't know it yet, a deserter who would never see home again. That night, Emmett lay in his bunk staring at the canvas ceiling above him. Around him, other soldiers snored peacefully. They had no idea that 20 yards away, behind stacks of spare tires and under oil-stained tarps in the motor pool, a German woman was hiding. A woman whose life now depended entirely on Emmett's ability to keep lying. He had given Anneliese his canteen and 2 K-ration bars. He had promised to return at dawn. He had watched her curl up between jerry cans and the fence, barely visible in the shadows, and he had walked away feeling her terrified eyes on his back. Now, unable to sleep, he understood the full weight of what he had done. He had lied to a Soviet officer. He had lied to his own sergeant. He had hidden enemy military personnel on an American base. Any single one of these crimes meant court-martial. All three together might mean a firing squad. Dawn arrived too quickly. Emmett pulled on his uniform with hands that trembled slightly. He walked through camp trying to look normal. Other soldiers stumbled toward the mess tent for powdered eggs and weak coffee. Nobody paid him any attention. Why would they? He was just Crow, the quiet mechanic who fixed broken vehicles and never caused trouble. The irony almost made him laugh. If they knew what he had done yesterday, they would tackle him before he reached the motor pool. He found Annalisa exactly where he had left her. She was curled between equipment, barely visible under the tarp. When she heard his footsteps, she sat up fast, eyes wide with fear. Then she recognized him, and her whole body sagged with relief. "I thought maybe you would not come," she whispered in her broken English. "I thought maybe you would decide it is too dangerous." Emmett knelt down, checking that they were alone. "I promised, didn't I?" He handed her fresh water and his own breakfast rations. She took them with shaking hands. "Thank you. You give me your food." He shrugged. "I can get more. You can't." She nodded slowly. Then, instead of eating immediately, she asked the question he had been dreading. "What happens now? You cannot hide me forever." Emmett sat back on his heels. "I'm working on that. Lieutenant Holloway wants to see me in an hour. He's going to ask about you, about the intelligence you supposedly have." Annalise's face went pale with fear. "I have no intelligence. I was only a nurse. I know nothing of military value." "I know that, and you know that, but they don't know that yet." He pulled out a wrinkled map, stolen from the headquarters tent the previous night. "So we're going to make some up." For the next 45 minutes, crouched in a hiding spot that smelled of motor oil and canvas, Emmett Crow and Annalisa Vogler constructed the most elaborate lie of both their lives. He showed her positions on the map, towns where German hospitals had actually existed. She told him which ones were real, which units had passed through, which details would sound believable to American intelligence officers. He asked questions an interrogator might ask. She practiced answers that mixed truth with invention. Yes, she had been a Wehrmacht nurse. Yes, she had treated wounded from various divisions. Yes, she had overheard officers talking, but she was just a nurse. Nobody important. Nobody who received briefings on military strategy. "What if they ask about specific commanders?" Annalisa's voice was tight with stress. "What if they know I am lying?" Emmett thought carefully before responding. "Then you tell them you were just a nurse. You heard names but didn't understand ranks. You remember faces but not unit designations. Confusion is believable. You've been running for 2 weeks. You're exhausted and traumatized. Fuzzy details aren't suspicious. They're human." She studied him with something like wonder in her eyes. "You are good at this, at deception." He smiled without any real humor. "I've been in the army 2 years. You learn to lie convincingly, or you learn to suffer." "I chose lying." Before she could respond, footsteps approached. Emmett's heart lurched. He motioned for Annalisa to stay absolutely still and stepped out from behind the tarp, just as Corporal Harlan Treadwell rounded the corner. Harlan was Emmett's supervisor in the motor pool, a farm kid from Iowa who had never wanted to fight anyone. He just wanted to go home, marry his sweetheart, and grow corn for the rest of his life. "Crow, you seen that German woman everyone's talking about?" Harlan's voice sounded casual, but his eyes were sharp. Emmett forced his pulse to stay calm. "What German woman? Come on. Everyone in camp knows. You grabbed some nurse at the checkpoint yesterday, told that Soviet major you were questioning her for intelligence." Harlan crossed his arms. "So where is she?" "Captain Stritch from S2 is looking for her, wants to do a proper interrogation." This was the moment Emmett could confess right now. Hand Annalisa over to intelligence. Claim he had made an error in judgment. Accept whatever punishment came. It would be the smart decision. Instead, he heard himself lie again. "She's secured in Supply Tent 3. I've been keeping her separated until S2 was ready for her." Supply Tent 3 was on the other side of camp, completely empty. Harlan's eyes narrowed. He knew Emmett well enough to sense something was wrong. For a long, uncomfortable moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Harlan sighed deeply. "You're doing something incredibly stupid, aren't you?" Emmett couldn't answer. His throat was too tight. Harlan rubbed his face with both hands in pure frustration. "Jesus, Crow, what did you get yourself into?" "Something I can't get out of, not without help." "Help doing what? Hiding an enemy combatant?" Harlan's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. You know what they do to soldiers who desert? Who aid the enemy? She's not the enemy. Emmett's voice came out harder than he intended. The war is over, Harlan. Germany surrendered. She's just a terrified woman who will be killed if we hand her to the Soviets. Harlan looked away, jaw working with internal struggle. Finally, he spoke without meeting Emmett's eyes. I didn't see anything. Don't know where she is. Don't want to know. But if this comes back on me, I'm telling the truth. He walked away quickly. Emmett sagged against a jeep, adrenaline leaving him shaky. That was too close. And the worst part was knowing that the real danger hadn't even started yet. At 900 hours, Emmett was summoned to Lieutenant Prescott Halloway's tent. Halloway was a West Point graduate who ran everything by regulation and expected the same from every soldier under his command. His uniform was always pressed. His boots were always polished. His questions were always direct and difficult to dodge. Emmett stood at attention, trying to keep his face neutral while his stomach churned with anxiety. At ease, Crow. Halloway didn't look up from the paperwork on his desk. Major Strelnikov filed a formal complaint this morning. He claims you obstructed Soviet authority at the checkpoint yesterday. He claims you detained a German military nurse without proper authorization. He claims this woman is wanted for war crimes. Emmett's heart dropped into his boots. War crimes? That was new information. That changed everything. Sir, the woman claimed she had intelligence on Wehrmacht positions and supply locations in the Torgau sector. I secured her for S2 interrogation according to standard procedure. According to what standard procedure exactly? Halloway finally looked up, his eyes hard as granite. You're a mechanic, Crow, not intelligence, not an interrogator. What made you think you had authority to detain anyone? Emmett scrambled for an answer that would hold. Sir, during the bulge, we were briefed that any potential intelligence sources should be secured immediately. German medical personnel often have detailed knowledge of unit movements and casualty figures. I thought, you thought. Halloway's voice was flat and cold. Do you know what Major Strelnikov claims this woman actually did? No, sir. He says she was assigned to a Wehrmacht hospital that performed medical experiments on Soviet prisoners. He says she's wanted for questioning about crimes against humanity. The words hit Emmett like a punch to the chest. He thought about Annaliese's scarred hands, her exhausted face, the way she had begged him not to let them take her. Was it possible? Had he protected someone who had done terrible things? No. He had looked into her eyes. He had seen fear, not guilt. He had seen a woman running for her life, not a criminal hiding from justice. And even if Strelnikov's accusations contained some truth, Emmett doubted the Soviets wanted her for legitimate justice. They wanted revenge. They wanted to make an example. They wanted someone to punish for 4 years of brutal warfare. Sir, with respect, she claims she helped American prisoners of war. That should be verified before we hand her to anyone. Halloway studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. You believe her story? Yes, sir, I do. Another lie. Emmett wasn't sure what he believed anymore. He only knew that handing her over felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Halloway sighed heavily. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to deliver this woman to Captain Stritch at S2 this afternoon. Intelligence will interrogate her properly. If she has legitimate information, we'll process it through official channels. If she doesn't, or if Strelnikov's allegations have any merit, she goes to Soviet custody immediately. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Emmett left the tent feeling like a man, standing on thin ice, hearing cracks spread beneath his feet with every step forward. He had maybe 4 hours before S2 expected delivery of a prisoner he had hidden in the motor pool, a prisoner he had filled with rehearsed lies that wouldn't survive professional interrogation. Back at the motor pool, he found Annaliese sitting exactly where he had left her. Her knees were pulled to her chest. Her eyes were huge with waiting. We have a problem, he said, without any gentle introduction. They're claiming you committed war crimes, medical experiments on Soviet prisoners. Her face drained of all color. No, never. That is lie. I treated wounded, German and Allied. I never harmed anyone. I tried to save lives. That was my only purpose. I believe you, but Strelnikov is pushing hard. He wants you badly, and S2 expects me to deliver you to Captain Stritch in 4 hours for proper interrogation. Annaliese started shaking. Her whole body trembled with fear she could no longer control.
If they give me to Soviets, I will not survive interrogation. They will not care about truth. They will make me confess to anything. They will break me until I say whatever they want me to say. Emmett knelt in front of her. Then we don't let them take you. How? You said yourself you cannot hide me forever. I know what I said, but I'm figuring something out. He had no idea what, but saying the words out loud made them feel almost possible.
Anneliese looked at him with eyes that had stopped hoping days ago and were now trying to hope again. You have helped me so much already. You should not risk more. You should let me go. Tell them I escaped. Tell them you tried to stop me. Tell them it is not your fault. The suggestion was logical. Emmett could claim she had overpowered him, stolen a vehicle, disappeared into the chaos of post-war Germany. He would face minor discipline, maybe lose a rank, but nothing serious. His life would continue. He looked at this woman he had known for less than 24 hours, this stranger who had grabbed his arm and changed everything. He thought about Des Kavanaugh bleeding out in frozen snow, whispering that promise, making Emmett swear to protect the ones who couldn't fight back. No, he said simply.
I'm not letting you go. We're seeing this through together. Anneliese's eyes filled with tears. Why? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. My best friend died saving my life. Maybe this is how I pay that forward. Or maybe I'm just tired of following orders that feel wrong. Either way, you're stuck with me. She reached out and touched his hand, a small gesture that meant everything. You are a good man, Emmett, bro? I'm a mechanic from Boston who's in way over his head. He stood up, decision made. Can you drive? She blinked in confusion. Drive what? A truck. Can you drive a truck? Yes. In hospital, sometimes I drove ambulance. Emmett grabbed supplies and started shoving them into a canvas bag. Rations, water, medical kit, map. Then we're leaving. Now.
We're getting out of this camp, crossing to British lines and disappearing before anyone realizes we're gone. Anneliese stared at him. That is desertion. They will hunt you. They will execute you. If they catch you. Only if they catch us. He looked at her directly. Unless you want to wait for S2, get interrogated, then handed to the Soviets. Anneliese stood up, still shaking, but with something new in her eyes, determination, hope. Then we go, together. The truck's engine coughed twice and died. Emmett turned the key again. Nothing. Just a clicking sound that echoed through the empty forest like a death sentence. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel and looked at Anneliese, whose face had gone pale in the fading afternoon light. They had made it maybe 40 kilometers before the fuel gauge dropped below empty, then past empty, then into the red zone that meant they were running on fumes and prayers. Now, both had run out. We walk, Emmett said, grabbing the supply bag from behind the seat. The forest pressed in around them. Dense pine trees blocked most of the remaining daylight. Thick undergrowth made every step difficult. This was the kind of wilderness where a person could hide forever or get lost and never be found. They had left the main road an hour ago when Emmett spotted Soviet patrol vehicles in the distance. He had chosen concealment over speed. Now that choice felt like it might kill them both. Anneliese climbed out of the truck, stumbling slightly. She had barely eaten in days. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was fading into pure exhaustion. Emmett caught her elbow and steadied her. How far to British lines? She asked. He checked the map, trying to calculate distance against terrain. Maybe 20 kilometers through this forest, then across open farmland. Then we hit the British sector near Wittenberg. 20 kilometers, 12 miles. In peacetime, an easy day's walk. But Emmett's ankle was swelling from jumping out of the truck too hard. His ribs ached from the rough drive through cratered roads. And Anneliese looked ready to collapse. We cannot make that tonight, she said quietly. No, we need to hide. Rest. Move again at dawn. He scanned the darkening woods. There. See that ridge? Might be caves or overhangs. Somewhere out of sight. They climbed through thick undergrowth as night fell. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. Every bird call made them freeze. Behind them, distant voices carried through the trees. Russian voices. The Soviets were searching, probably following the abandoned truck's trail. Emmett's mind raced with calculations. The truck would lead them to this area. Dogs would pick up their scent. They had maybe an hour before the search reached them, maybe less. Under the ridge they found what Emmett had hoped for, a shallow cave formed by collapsed boulders. Barely big enough for two people, but hidden by ferns and heavy brush. In here, he whispered, pulling aside the vegetation. They crawled inside. The space was so tight they had to sit shoulder to shoulder, knees pulled up to their chests. It smelled of damp earth and animal musk. Something had lived here before, hopefully not recently. Outside, footsteps approached. Boots crunching on pine needles, voices speaking Russian, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, sweeping back and forth across the trees. Emmett put his hand over Annaliese's mouth, not to silence her, but to remind her that even breathing too loudly could give them away. She nodded, understanding. Her eyes were huge in the darkness. They came this way, one Russian voice said. Truck tracks lead here. Spread out. Search everything.
Major Strelnikov wants them alive. Alive. That was almost worse than dead. Emmett thought about what the Soviets would do to an American deserter. Thought about what they would do to Annalise. His hand moved to the pistol at his belt, the one he had grabbed from the truck. 8 rounds, if it came to that. If they were cornered with no escape, he would make sure Annalise didn't get taken alive. And then he would make sure he didn't either. But the footsteps passed. The voices faded. The flashlights moved deeper into the forest, away from their hiding spot. Emmett waited 10 full minutes before removing his hand from Annalise's mouth, before allowing himself to breathe normally. They are gone, she whispered, for now. They'll be back at dawn with more men and dogs.
We need to move before sunrise. She leaned her head back against cold stone. I am sorry. This is my fault. You would be safe if you had never helped me. Emmett looked at her in the cramped darkness. You didn't force me. I chose, and I would choose again. They rested for a few hours, taking turns watching the cave entrance. Neither truly slept. Too dangerous, too much adrenaline. When grey light began filtering through the ferns, a new sound made them both freeze. Truck engines, multiple vehicles, shouting in Russian and English. The search had intensified. Major Strelnikov had escalated this into a joint Soviet-American operation. An American deserter captured with Soviet cooperation would make both sides look good. They would find this cave eventually. The search was too thorough, too systematic. There, Emmett pointed through gaps in the foliage. British checkpoint. See the flag? The Union Jack hung limp in the still morning air. Maybe 50 meters of open ground between them and salvation. Behind them, soldiers were crashing through the trees, minutes away. Ready? Emmett asked. Annalise gripped his good hand. Together, they burst from the tree line and sprinted across plowed farmland, feet sinking into soft earth, lungs burning with effort. Behind them, soldiers emerged from the forest, rifles cracked, dirt kicked up around their feet. Halfway across, 3/4, almost there. Something slammed into Emmett's shoulder. The impact spun him around and knocked him down. He had been shot. The pain came a second later, white-hot and blinding. Annalise screamed his name, tried to pull him up. Run, he told her. Leave me, run! No, get up, Emmett, get up! She was crying, pulling at him with strength born of pure desperation. Emmett forced himself to stand. His left arm hung useless. Blood soaked through his uniform. They staggered the last 50 meters and collapsed into the British tree line, just as more bullets tore through the space they had occupied seconds before. Annalise's hands were already examining his wound with a nurse's trained efficiency. Through and through, missed the bone, but bleeding badly. She tore strips from her dress and wrapped his shoulder tight. Can you walk? Have to. They moved deeper into British territory. Behind them, the pursuing soldiers stopped at the invisible line between zones. They could hear angry shouting, Russian and English voices arguing, but they had made it. Somehow, impossibly, they had reached British soil. The British soldiers at the checkpoint raised their rifles as 2 figures stumbled toward them from the tree line. One was bleeding heavily. The other was half carrying him. Behind them, American and Soviet troops stood at the invisible border between zones, weapons raised, shouting demands in 2 languages. Sergeant Brynmore Parry stepped forward. He was a weathered Welshman who had seen too much war to be surprised by anything anymore. He raised his hand toward the pursuing soldiers. That's far enough, mates. This is British territory. Whatever is happening stops at this line. Emmett and Annalise collapsed at the checkpoint. She kept pressure on his shoulder wound while he tried to speak through the pain. Asylum, he managed. We're requesting asylum, British protection. Major Strelnikov pushed forward, his face red with fury. Those 2 are fugitives, American deserter and German war criminal. They must be returned to proper authority immediately. An American military police lieutenant added his voice. The soldier is AWOL from the United States Army. He falls under our jurisdiction. Sergeant Parry looked at the two people bleeding at his feet, then at the officers demanding their surrender, and he made a decision that would save 2 lives. Right then, they've requested British protection on British soil. That makes them our problem now. You lot can file proper paperwork through official channels, but until I hear from my commanding officer, they stay with us. Strelnikov's hand moved toward his sidearm. Parry's rifle came up instantly, not quite pointing at anyone, but the message was clear. Behind Parry, a dozen British soldiers took defensive positions. The tension stretched like wire about to snap. For several long seconds, war seemed possible over 2 refugees. Then the American lieutenant stepped back, seeing how badly this could go. We'll file a formal extradition request. Strelnikov glared with cold hatred, but he followed suit. This is not over. Never is, Parry agreed. But it's over for today. Clear off. The soldiers withdrew. A British medic came forward to examine Emmett's shoulder. You're lucky, he said, in a thick Scottish accent. Another inch right, and it would have hit the artery. Still, you've lost blood. Need stitches. While he worked, Captain Crispin Lockwood arrived. He was a fair-minded officer who had evaluated thousands of desperate stories during the war. He studied the 2 refugees with sharp, but not unkind eyes. Right then, who are you and why am I protecting you from our allies? Emmett tried to sit straighter, failed. Private Emmett Crow, 69th Infantry Division, or I'm AWOL, deserted 2 days ago. And her? Anneliese Vogler, German civilian, displaced person, fleeing Soviet persecution. Lockwood's eyebrow rose. German civilian? The Soviets claim she's a Wehrmacht nurse wanted for war crimes. Anneliese spoke. Her English was clearer now, strengthened by necessity and desperation. I was nurse, yes, but I committed no crimes. I treated wounded soldiers. I helped Allied prisoners when I could. The Soviets want me because I ran from them, not because I did anything wrong. Lockwood pulled a camp chair over and sat down. Let me understand this correctly. American soldier deserts to protect German nurse from Soviet custody. Both of you cross through active military zones, evade capture, take a bullet, and arrive here requesting asylum. He paused. That about sum it up? Yes, sir. And you expect me to grant asylum to an American deserter and a potential war criminal? Emmett met his gaze directly. I expect you to do what's right, not what's convenient. Lockwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. What's right? That's a dangerous phrase in wartime. The war is over, sir. Is it? Doesn't feel over. Lockwood stood and paced for a moment. Then he turned. I could hand you both back. Probably should. Would make my life considerably easier. He paused. But I didn't fight 5 years to see people thrown to wolves because of politics. You'll stay in a displaced persons camp until we sort this mess out. Could be weeks, could be months. He looked at Anneliese. And if evidence emerges that you actually committed war crimes, Nurse Vogler, I will hand you over myself. Clear? Clear. Thank you. The displaced persons camp was a city of canvas and mud. Thousands of refugees from a dozen nations waited there for the world to decide their fates. Emmett and Anneliese were processed, photographed, and given tent assignments. Because they had claimed to be married, they were placed together in the married couples section. The bureaucrats processing refugees had heard stranger stories every day for months. That first night in the camp, lying on cots in a tent shared with 3 other couples, they finally had a moment to breathe. Emmett's shoulder throbbed despite morphine. Annaliese's hands still shook from exhaustion, but they were alive. They were together. They were safe for the first time since that checkpoint at the Elbe. What happens now? She whispered. We wait. British will investigate your background, verify the truth, and when they find I am telling truth, then maybe we get refugee status, permission to stay, build something new. Days turned into weeks. Emmett's shoulder healed. Anneliese worked in the camp infirmary. Her nursing skills were desperately needed. Emmett helped repair vehicles and equipment. One evening in early June, walking through camp after their work shifts, Emmett stopped suddenly. Marry me. Anneliese turned, surprised. What? Marry me. For real. Not for papers. Because I love you. Because I cannot imagine waking up without you. She studied his face. We have known each other 1 month. I have known you through things most people never experience in a lifetime. I know you are brave. I know you are kind. That is enough. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I will marry you. They were wed 2 weeks later by the British chaplain. Neither had rings. But when they kissed, as husband and wife, it was the most real thing either had experienced since before the war. In 1954, President Eisenhower pardoned most wartime deserters. By then, Emmett and Annalisa Crowe had immigrated to Boston. He opened a garage. She became a hospital nurse. They had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren. 60 years later, a great-granddaughter asked how they met. Emmett looked at Annalisa, still beautiful to him at 88. She grabbed my arm and said, "Don't let them take me." And I decided right then that I wouldn't. Not ever. We saved each other, Annalisa added. And we never stopped. Some orders exist only to be broken. Some strangers are worth everything. And some promises last 60 years and beyond. In the spring of 1945, a mechanic from Boston grabbed a stranger's hand and stepped off a cliff. He chose conscience over command. He chose humanity over regulation. He chose a woman he had known for minutes over a country he had served for years. This was not propaganda. This was one moment of mercy that changed 2 lives forever. History remembers the generals and the treaties, but the true measure of war is found in the small choices made by ordinary people. In the split seconds when someone decides that following orders means losing their soul. In the hands that reach across enemy lines and hold on tight. Emmett Crowe never considered himself a hero. He was just a mechanic who fixed what was broken, including, as it turned out, one woman's faith in humanity. They had come as enemies, they left as family, and in the end that was the only victory that truly mattered.